abstract universal is not divine mystery. It is something more technical, you could say. It is to be approached in technical terms, independently of theological or profoundly philosophical considerations. Now, while I'm doing that, there's somebody else, the architect perhaps, who is applying the same logic. And then we have you name it, whatever discipline. We have a model, we have a sort of this abstract universal of the plan, and then I have to realize it. And we're all practicing this logic, so to speak, together without necessarily realizing that we're playing into a larger, overarching version of that logic, the macrocosm. What the society at large is doing is trying to realize its notions. So the modern world appeals to all of its abstract universals. The universals of the modern Enlightenment, freedom, you have all kinds of beautiful notions, including fraternity or equality, and all kinds of wonderful shiny things, but also, and perhaps most importantly, a new notion of mathematics. So numbers are now understood as abstract symbols, right? That you can do something with them, something that you couldn't do with older notions of arithmos in Greek, right? It's kind of something that
they become the key to technological power.
Yes, well, they have to be realized. That's the key, is this, that they're there. And of course, you see this in Hegel, right? In Hegel, we have the you could say you have the Cartesian ego, which is just a formal universal. It's an abstract universal. It's not something really concrete. But to make it concrete, it's not enough for you to do something. We all have to be doing something. So I do my part, but at the same time, everybody does his part. And when we all do our part, what we're doing is all contributing to the rise of a concrete universal, not the abstract one that Plato or Aristotle or all the philosophers prior to Marx might have, or Spinoza might have dreamt of, but a concrete one. And of course, it's that concrete universal must be something like the open society, Hegel's state, the global society, the great society of the American pragmatists. So it is, but that means that it's a society established through this logic that is independent of theological and deeply philosophical concerns again, which, what does that mean? It means that it's a fundamentally technological society, because it addresses problems in a strictly technical manner. So the technical is abstracted for the sake of realizing the vision, because you can't realize that model, now it's called the ideal, or it's called in any case, it's an abstract universal. You can't realize it if you don't, and not successfully anyway, if you don't approach it independently of these theological, metaphysical problems, questions that would distract you, so to speak, from that realization. They would take you away from it. They would make you doubt what you're doing. Why don't you just do it? Why don't you realize that prospect? And the whole modern world, I think, works that way. We have to get rid of all of these considerations so we can achieve that success. The success is contingent upon our abandonment, or abandoning of, well, what we could say in a very broad sense, the fundamentally Platonic orientation of pre-modern man. So you're focusing on the soul, which means the whole, but the whole is mysterious, you see. The old whole entirety is very mysterious and very profound, and you can't grasp it. Whereas the ideal is much is appropriate for this project because it's clear and distinct. Clear and distinct ideal. Of course, it has this problem that it's not concrete, but we can work on that. We can make it concrete. Whereas the old whole did not lend itself to this kind of enterprise. You can't, what are you going to do? Realize the mystery, the divine mystery? No, because it's its own realization. It is reality. So you have to move towards it and just leave the signs. So in this case, painting would be all about leaving signs of this path and of the other. Yeah, not an end in itself, but it would just be, okay, look, I'm not, and of course, ancient painting is, or classical painting is never really pretentious overall. I mean, you could have a pretentious freak, but they probably burned his work or just left it in a corner. It didn't matter. But overall, the works that we praise from the classical works, and I think, even up to the 1600s, clearly, I mean, and later too, but I mean, less and less, because more we are ingrained into this modern logic, the more we praise only what, of course, you, I think, completely justly decry, namely the superficial, the glamorous, the pretentious. Here, look, and forget the interiority, the poetic, of course. But I think that to resist that impulse, one must regain access to this, really 100% in a radical way, to this classical orientation. So not the universal that I have to realize, not my model, but what is at the center. You could also say a theocentric, but in a philosophical sense, a theocentric conception of painting. So the divine mystery is there, and I'm on my way as a human being, not just as a painter, I'm as a human being, okay? We talk about the Renaissance notion of man as he does everything. Well, he's not a plumber. Michelangelo was not a plumber, but he was involved in various activities. But and of course, towards the end of his life, more in poetry.
Da Vinci was a plumber.
Yeah, but on paper.
No,
he worked a little bit.
He realized fantastic plumbing works, one of which I saw.
I mean that somebody who's spending his time, fixing tubes. He is an architect of all aspects of life. And of course, his concern is not fixing and cleaning pipes. Everything is, he's considering all aspects, little leaves, but all in the light of a wholeness. Now that wholeness is a mystery. Of course, he has this dream of the cave. He stands in front of the cave. It's dark and inscrutable, and he's taken by these, on the one hand, by terror, and the other hand, by this desire to see inside. So this conflictual response, which characterizes the man, the human being, really, the anthropos, is crucial here. So you're not going to solve anything, but you leave signs, testimonies, unfinished work. Jot down something. They're notes for other people to see, this is just a shadow of what he was up to. He is not trying to solve any problem there and then, okay? This is by necessity what the classical attitude entails. The modern attitudes entail something else eventually. Now, if one could be stuck in the middle and say, well, where do I go? And you want to get a little bit of that, a little bit of this. But I think it ultimately, it's not a real alternative. We're just faced with these two alternatives. And the early moderns understood this. Whatever was before is out of the window because it just does not allow us to fulfill this other orientation, if you like, of life, okay, which is progressive by necessity. Even though I may not realize it, because after all, okay, I have my notion, okay, painting is all about composition. Great, it's true that there's a composition, and this is something, the ordering of things, all the parts and constitute a beautiful picture, wonderful, and I work on that, and I try to realize that notion, Now somebody else is doing the same. I don't realize while I'm, as a painter, I don't, as a man, I may realize it, but as a painter, while I'm working, I don't realize that what I'm doing now is a microcosm of something bigger. So everybody's working towards the realization of an abstract, and that realization is the open society, which is by necessity the technological society, which essentially is trying to convert nature into a computer or something like that.
Well, look,
that's the provocation.
yeah. Well, I'm in profound sympathy with what I understand you to be saying. I'm not sure I understand the whole thing, but I think I do. I'll just say one thing, and then I'll ask a question. I divide modernism in painting into three periods, and the early modernists, the people who were in the early and middle late part of the but I mean it goes beyond that because it's not just a time thing. But the early modernism turns out, in spite of the labels it's been given, it turns out to have been a reactionary movement. And we can talk about that, but you use the word composition, and composition for me is it's the word around which I've constructed my whole painting education that's taken decades. And I don't understand what you mean by that word when you're talking about painting.
Is that your question?
I'd like you to clarify for me what you mean by the word composition.
Why don't you tell me first what do you want to characterize? I mean, I can give you, the 10 words or less definitions, but what do you mean by that? By composition?
I mean, I mean, again, I could. When you brought up composition early in you brought up the word, and I didn't understand what you meant. But
so you don't want to try to?
Well, I mean, I could start talking and talk for hours about what I mean.
Well, I could too, perhaps, but do we want to? If that is an important issue here, it may very well deserve to be.
It's not necessarily the word, but it's certainly in my case, it's a whole set of things that are lined up behind the word. Whatever actual word is used.
Right. No, of course it's not the word, but
I mean, if you want to just define composition as putting a painting together.
Okay.
All right. But then what you're evoking is how a person should be oriented. And a painter is a person.
Yeah.
So, I mean, before we're a painter, we're a person. And you're talking about how we should be oriented, and the kind of orientation that you're talking about. That all that rings bells with me. That said, all right, so you're a person, you're trying to be oriented in a direction that's appropriate to personhood, and then you're a painter. All right, so naturally you would like your paintings, just like everything else that you get involved when being a marriage, friendships, how we conduct our life, everything everything is informed by our orientation. If we're selfish people thinking only about power, then that is going to color everything we do. But then we're going to do something, and the doing of a thing, the practice of an art in the Greek sense of the word techne, it involves mastery of the art. It's being oriented. For instance, you're oriented towards, and for instance, you're oriented the right way, and you're a soldier, and you're going to have to
learn how to use your rifles.
Right, and you're the discipline, and learn how to cooperate with your fellow soldiers, and how to communicate, and how to set up camp. I mean, soldiering is like anything else. It's not, you can't just do it at the snap of a finger.
Absolutely.
So there's things you have to learn. Mm-hmm. And the way I use the word composition has to do with things that a painter has to know to be able to practice the craft. And the craft of painting, painting is very special, because it's not like, for instance, it's not like music. I mean, there's aspects of music which are like that. But let's say you want to play the piano. You can't just, it's not like singing, for instance. Anybody can sing a song. Not anybody can be an opera singer, though some people can just be an opera singer. But playing the piano is something else. And practically nobody, maybe there's a few very, very special people, but it requires certain things. And there are things that are known about how to play the piano. And let people who are naturally gifted in all different kinds of ways, but usually people's gifts have a certain architecture, and so we can often be helped by teachers and so on. And so the art of piano playing is very highly developed, and people have to study it, and it takes a long time to develop it to a high level. And painting is the same way. There are things that need to be understood about how the craft functions.
Shall we say grammar, the grammar of the discipline?
Well, you can use any language you want, but there are things to learn about how the thing works, because
when you speak, you learn your grammar, and you're able to write.
Yeah, I mean, that vocabulary works fine for me, but it's just this, but it's not exactly, in the case of painting, it's not like learning a language. We learn the language. We learn language very naturally by imitating.
I know, but yes, but okay, well, the same thing.
And
I think
painting,
it is a language. I think it is a language. You're learning the grammar to be able to write a good book.
I don't want to get into a
it
whole
works.
thing.
It works all right.
Well, it works okay, except there's in a general way. I mean, I call painting a language, but there are just certain differences. I mean, in a rough and ready way, that works. I mean, it's a language. The language has to be learned. There's things about learning the language which are not necessarily evident. And today, I think they are particularly unevident. It used to be.
There's a reason, yes.
Well, I mean, I think we would agree on what those reasons are. I mean, these things used to be properly practiced, and the young painters would be in contact with the art being properly practiced. Yeah, and there were things that were said and done in their presence that clued them into to what it was, because not all of it is not all of it can be. Certain things can be suggested verbally, but they can only be shown or understood in ways that don't
Yes,
have to.
yes. I would say that the reason why we've moved away from that, we have abandoned that, is tied to the logic of modernity. Once we're exposed to this promise of an imminent realization of the or coming of the concrete universal, what's the point in investing our energy in learning the grammar?
Well, no,
Yes.
Marco. The thing is, I agree with you. I think I fundamentally agree with you, except that I have some notions about very concretely how it arose. I mean, I think it's what you're saying, except that I think I know exactly what happened. And to put it generally, I mean, I could talk about specific historical things. To put it generally, exactly because the machine must be served, painting, there was this pressure on painting that occurred, I would say, in two great surges since the late 18th century that put ideological pressure on painting. That painting should serve the idea.
But not only painting. I think it's on
everything. But we're talking about painting,
yeah.
Obviously.
Yeah.
So, but that then had a specific effect on how people thought about painting and how they practiced it and how they taught it. And the specific effect doesn't really have anything to do with the goal of reaching the idea. I mean, it does and it doesn't. And the specific effect is to concentrate. So in other words, painting has to serve the idea. And in order to serve the idea, it has to be in harmony with the idea, and it has to present the idea. In other words, it has to become propaganda.
Well, it's superficial.
Well, yes, but right. Very broadly speaking, it has to become propaganda. The effect on painting is to turn painting into, my way of putting it is to push painting towards its illustrative aspect.
The pretentious. Sorry.
Well, pretentious is something else, but I mean, for me, that would be something else. But in other words, since painting has to teach certain things, these kinds of things, since it has to manifest certain things, the concentration becomes towards a superficial, not a superficial aspect, because it's a profound aspect, but sort of, illustrative in a more superficial sense.
Yes,
showing things, showing the right things, and therefore showing things more and more realistically, finally, because that's that
I have a problem with that notion.
And logic, and it's
right,
so it's and the result is that
mechanically.
Yeah, the result is that the first painters who get convinced into this optic, and I'm thinking of David in particular. And what happens is that the teaching of painting then gets reoriented, and the painters that follow aren't necessarily involved in these things or thinking about these things, but they get involved in the painting values of illustration. I mean, they're not worried about the idea necessarily, but they get caught up in this, and that becomes that becomes what people admire, and so on, and so then painting veers off into this direction where it becomes what I would simply, it starts to be images and stops being painting, and there, I'll just say painting in the noble sense, or let's say painting oriented the way you're talking about it.
Okay.
And what happened, in my view, is that the early modernists were the painters who saw this thing happening, more and more in the 19th century. And it's subtle to see that, because now we're in such a disastrous situation that we're faced with these huge, monstrous contrasts. In the 19th century, it was just the beginning of the thing. You could see it if you could understand it, but most people couldn't tell the difference between these things. So there were a handful of artists who are often today well-known artists, but they were among hundreds of artists, many of whom were as well-known or more successful than they were at the time. So we have a distorted view of what was happening during those periods, because we don't. It's hard to know about what the painting scene really was those times. I mean, there's ways you can learn about it, but it's not what we generally think. So there were a few of these guys who I would refer to as the early modernists, who resisted this thing, and who engaged in a reactionary thing in an effort to bring painting back to something good. And I think they did. And then there's a whole story which we don't have to talk about what happened with second wave modernism and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But I think where we disagree is the point at which it becomes a matter of teaching and learning painting. And I don't, as sympathetic as I am to your discourse, and I think I'm in fundamental agreement with it. Yeah, the idea of and I talk about this.
Well, there are things that I may say about these responses to the drive to the one-dimensional man in painting that we might not be in at least formal agreement on. You speak about a reactionary, quote unquote, aspect of the early modernists, and this happened in various aspects of life. And so we have, of course, this reactionary response was took full-fledged appearance in with Romanticism. So Romanticism responding to the modern.
But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking.
I know. But there is an aspect of this. There is the one-dimensional man of the early Enlightenment, and but then again, you do have this tension ingrained in the early Enlightenment, and to the extent that you have the two poles that characterize the whole modern world. So you have the rationalist and the empiricist. So on the face of things, it looks like they're at odds with each other.
What do you mean empiricists?
Well, for example, Descartes, Locke, are ideas innate or are ideas learned? Are they empirically acquired? On the face of things, these are two antithetical positions, and so the very birth of modernity, modern thought and modern literature and modern discourse is characterized by these two poles, the rationalist and the empiricist. But then again,
what are these empiricists? What's the difference between how are they different from the rationalists?
On the face of it,
I just don't understand the term.
Oh well, typical terms of the debates of the early modern and later, and they're carried on
Which is what?
into our day. They're carried on into our day, and you will in recent
But
decades.
Marco, you've got to give me some very basic information because I don't know what you mean. I'm not informed
These are
about what you're talking
standard
about.
terms. Well, these are standard terms. If you Descartes,
All right, explain them to me.
Hume,
Explain
Locke,
them.
I mean the various the great empiricists, and then you have the the rational.
And so, what are they? These empiricists? What's their attitude? They're not rash. They're anti-rational.
No, but they now you could answer that question in two ways. One is by exposing the illusory nature of the opposition, and the other one is by focusing on the purported significance of that opposition. And on the face of things, one, in terms of what I just said, one group will emphasize the fact that knowledge is acquired through experience, and that the very ideas, all of our ideas, are acquired in experience. So there is nothing to return to, no fundamental principles that we can access independently of experience. Something to that effect.
Well, are those the Romantics?
No, we're talking before Romanticism.
Well, I mean, somehow what you're working up to is to suggest to me that these people that I'm labeling reactionaries are really one branch of modernism.
No, yes, but not. I'm not saying. Yeah, I'm not saying that they're either rationalists or empiricists. Although they would probably fit. Again, this is on an illusion. This opposition is a facade, which has these two characters play out their conflict in the interest of the unfolding of the modern world.
Well, okay. I mean, I still don't understand what
these
those.
are the
I
two
don't know.
poles of the early Enlightenment. Later,
I mean, can you give me a couple of names, for instance?
Well, I just gave them to you. Just a simple.
What, Hume?
Well, yeah, you can say Locke versus Descartes.
So Descartes is rationalism and Locke is empiricism?
Yes.
Well, I don't know what that has to do with painting in the 19th century.
Oh, I'm telling you that this is the modern world is developing through superficial oppositions.
Okay, except
it uses
that,
these two poles.
So then you're telling me that, I mean, I don't see it at all, but somehow you're suggesting that this group, that I call the early modernists, were somehow caught up in this this tension of modernism. Well, that's not right at all.
Give me a name. Give me a name. Give me a name.
No, I'm not going to. I'll give it to you another way, because I don't want to get right away into arguing about some painter, because your attitude about Poussin seems illegitimate to me.
Well, I mean, you just asked me for names of representatives.
No, but because I don't know what these terms are that you're talking about. You're talking to me about something I can't understand because I don't have the vocabulary. I don't have the education, so I don't know what you mean. Right. All right.
What I'm suggesting is.
Well, I see what you're suggesting. You're suggesting that what went on. What I'm suggesting went on in the 19th century.
Entirely. I don't want to say that overall that this is the logic of the modern world. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody who is related to the modern world must fit in to one of these two poles, which are flaky and fake poles, which are simply subservient to the unfolding of the modern project. Because you have good people who were, 1800s. You have, your responses to modernity that don't fit the bill. And of course, in the prophets of the modern world will try to make everybody fit in one or the other of the two categories. So, in more recent times, for instance, 20th century, you would have in Europe, and now I'm again going back to the intellectual debates. You will have the continental versus the analytic, Anglo-American analytic tradition. They call it a tradition. They make it up, and in academia, right? And then you have the continental, who go back through the likes of Heidegger, go back to this, to some extent, Romanticism, yeah, elaborations of Romanticism. So again, the rationalists now become not the rationalists in Descartes' sense, opposed to the empiricists. That dichotomy was replaced. Now we have the modern Enlightenment and the response to the modern Enlightenment, which is Romanticism. And as you probably know, people as Strauss have stressed the point that Romanticism failed because it was grounded in the same principles that the modern Enlightenment was set up on. So you can't. It was a fake battle. It was a lost from the very outset, and so it just contributed to further alienation from what was before the Enlightenment. So instead of getting closer to them, they alienated us even further, and this ushered into this further unfolding of the modern project. Now there may be others who didn't fit the bill. So take a Swift, or those who involved in the battle, in the querelle of the anciens et les modernes. They didn't necessarily fit the bill at all. They weren't they didn't define themselves in opposition to, but transcended altogether that, or to some extent, I think it is fair to allow for the possibility of people who struggle to step beyond that opposition and to expose themselves to a broader horizon. Okay, even Husserl, for example, I think transcended Descartes and did not.
Who?
Edmund Husserl.
Oh, Husserl.
Did not simply remain seated on fundamentally Cartesian, and especially in spite of what some of the titles of his works might suggest, that he was able, I think by the fifth, sixth Cartesian meditation, he was able to transcend altogether the limitations imposed by Descartes. But I would say that in general, what we have is that as long as we're speaking in opposition, then we are indebted to that which we oppose, and we.
Well, because there were some painters who rebelled against this illustrative.
I don't mean everyone. No, I don't mean everyone. No,
well, yeah. I mean that was the early modernist thing.
Some of the painters, right? Some of the painters you have referred to me, I look at, and I would.
Well, we have a deeper problem, Marco, because already you're already down on Poussin as a modernist problem, and I mean I'm seeing the whole thing in a whole different optic.
He's borderline for me.
But I'm seeing it in
I understand.
This purely painting business that it comes down to the perpetuation of the Roman school, what you could call the Roman school.
See, I have a problem with your pure painting notion.
Well, I don't know what you mean by pure painting. I don't talk about.
You talk about pure painting. You just said it.
I talk about true painting. True painting.
You just said. I thought you just said pure painting. But anyway.
No. True painting. But okay. I said the Roman school, and so there was this business. I write about it in my little book. There's this business of colore and designo and so on, and these different strands of painting arise out of the 15th century and 16th century.
Yeah.
And various things happen with this. I mean, for instance, it's the students of Michelangelo that go to France, Rosso and Pinturicchio, and they educate a whole.
Well, there's Francois Premier who invites a lot of people, even
yeah, right, yeah, and they come to Fontainebleau, and they start the school of Fontainebleau, and that has this tremendous effect on French painting, which then develops in certain kinds of ways, and so there's all these influences.
Yes.
And then in the 17th century, there's Poussin, who spends his life in Rome, and he pulls French painting into that mainstream of what I call the Roman school, which I think is the has been the how shall I put it? It's the great proper path from which there's various strayings and so on. And then the early modernists, more or less, particularly Puvis, who pull painting back. He was this tremendous influence that people don't realize what a tremendous influence he was. He was considered, before World War II, he was considered like one of the greatest painters ever. Now nobody thinks about him at all. He's not, but he had this importance because he's one of the artists who was really at the root of what was then called modernism later. But what he did was to reject this post-David thing that had happened in France with Ingres and eventually Bouguereau. And he was opposing the Roman school, Poussin in particular, but it's more than Poussin. It's Domenichino. It's
Domenichino, yeah.
And eventually it's Raphael. And eventually it's all those guys, eventually it's the influence of Titian and Michelangelo and so on. But in a certain sense, it goes back to Raphael.
Yes.
And then there was a whole adventure with that influence in the 19th century, which took on a certain importance, and work came out of it, which is now the painting that we think is important in the 19th century. But there was like 100 times more other stuff that came out of now called the academic school, because that's a wrong term, because everybody was in the academy and they were all friends and so on. But it's what the early modernists called illustrative painting. It became more and more illustrative.
Yes.
And then there's second wave modernism, which people, when I was young, I was brought up in that world. I was brought up in the world of modernism and expressionism in particular. So I grew up, on Cubism and so on. And then later I came to see this as modernism and the destroyed painting. But now I understand that it's more complicated than that.
Yes.
And that
they inherited something themselves.
What?
The Cubists inherited something themselves.
Well, yes. I mean, the Cubism is it has something profoundly essential to painting in it, right, even though in another way it has something evil in it.
Yeah.
So I just came to have a much more developed understanding of these things. And today we're in a situation where art has been destroyed.
Yeah,
And
I don't want to emphasize too much these points of agreement because we're in
well, I
agreement.
mean, but to me, they're points of disagreement,
No,
because where our discussion becomes a disagreement, I think, has to do with education. How do you, how in the situation we've gotten
okay,
into,
but for this,
how do you get painting going again?
okay, okay. Well, we don't need to get to cubism, but let me take a step back first because you refer to the Roman school. This reminds me of an important point, namely that, to go back to what I said at the beginning of our discussion here, and somewhat the sketch that I gave of the two distinct orientations, the classical and the modern, as I call them. There is something that we're capable of achieving to the extent that we abandon the classical orientation. The classical orientation would be tied to I think what they call today virtue ethics, but today it becomes a joke. So it centers upon something that is mysterious, something that is not that can't be grasped and quantified and manipulated, and it's an end in itself. So in the class, now this comes to light, I think, very well in classical calligraphy in the Far East, because there you have, it's not a minimalist art, it's not an illustrative, it's not that, this doesn't really fit the bill here.
It's not painting either.
What?
It's not painting either in
I
the
know, for
Western
them it
sense.
is. For them it is.
Well, for them it is, but it's not painting in the Western sense.
Well, it doesn't. It doesn't fit that, but it's bringing out. You can speak about cubism as, and it moving in that direction, but this is not it at all, because in this case, what we have is, of course, they had other types of painting, with landscapes and human figures integrated and so forth. But there you have a very strict, even legalistic almost, platform. You see that the characters themselves, the words were, they deserve to be called hieroglyphics. They were sacred, just as in all ancient written languages, the characters were, the languages originally is supposed to be from the gods. So the characters were sacred. And of course, the written ones were the preserve of very few people, the scribes and scholars who cherished them. And we're not talking about a very liberal society, so, which doesn't mean that there wasn't a liberal practice of this. Let me explain this in a few words. In classical China, for example, what we call China is not, China literally is from the Qin dynasty, which, and if you say what was before that, then you cannot have China because there had not been a Qin dynasty. So whatever the heck there was down there, and it was very small, and then there were other areas that didn't fit that. But there was an area where they developed arts and writing, and there were debates, and you wind up having these a flourishing of what we call calligraphy. It's not, they don't call it calligraphy. For example, they could call it the way of the brush, literally, and that's what they designate. That's what they call it, the way of the brush. Which, and as soon as they say the way, that's tied to the way of the gods. Now, just in a few words, these are traces of what I would call the irreducible element in the human being. So it's the trace of the bond between the human and the divine. And the flow of the character, and again, every character is mysterious. It refers to, it can refer, either they're writing a poem of their poetic composition of their own, or they're, in any case, every character, every hieroglyphic is going to be in the classics. So these are scholars of the classics, the ancient books, where the terms are terms of are pregnant with metaphysical significance. They could be in the I Ching, the Joy, the sometimes called the Book of Change. Yeah, so kind of but the word change can mean also not no change at all. Yeah, either one. So go figure. So it is a kind of it's a book about the fundamental order of things. If you have to, and these characters are indicating the fundamental order of things, and you through the characters, poetic entities, they mediate. You see our ordering of things and the fundamental order of things. Hence this almost obscure atmosphere to the writing, and poetic fragments and explanations and so forth. So these characters in this composition of what we call calligraphy, but I think it's very misleading because it's not an attempt to write beautifully. It is very much appreciated by authorities, emperors, as testifying to the virtue of the human being. And by virtue, we mean the bond between the divine and the human. And that's essential for the empire, for the order of the political order. And these writers, poets, they could be statesmen as well, are writing there, and this is the foundation, or you could say that it's understood as pertaining to the essence of painting. The painting, no matter how developed it is, and of course you will have the craftsmen who will be good at the landscape composition and the various aspects of it. Painting is essentially supposed to be, that's what that's what they're saying, essentially about a trace. It is a trace, a sign of this bond between the human and the divine, and that bond is called virtue, and it's something to be treasured. And in this writing, you have the essence of painting. So it's extremely praised and revered, and those who wrote these scripts are looked up to as heroes, as national heroes, as wonderful, heroes, and almost divine, and painters in that sense. That in the sense that they are. You're showing you what the essence of painting, what it, in a nutshell, this is what it's all about, or they're testifying to it rather. Okay. Now, if that is the case, and that's not just the case in in the East, in the Far East, but that this is bringing it out in a very vivid manner. This would allow us to look at what is happening in Europe, I think, in a fresh manner, where there have been often attempts to improve upon certain things, but now sometimes it works well, but up to a point. After that point, you have alienation, you have a decline. Then the question is, up to what point can you get? Now, maybe you can go further and have something even greater, but it becomes more and more difficult to go in that direction. And it becomes much easier to decline, to to pretend to, or to believe that you are bringing about an improvement, whereas in reality you're not. It's a decline. And I think that when we reach, okay, Raffaello, you can go further, but there are, when you reach, say, Michelangelo, Buonarroti, there is in his work a testimony of that bond between the human and the divine. Of course, you could say, in an illustrative sense, you have this cliche, yeah, this the creation of Adam. But ironically, that may bespeak more than what it seems to, than what it's taken to bespeak, namely the character of his work. And you will see this in poetry too. Is Platonic. Of course, he was a student of Dante himself. So the question is, where do you take painting from Michelangelo? Now, I think that you can develop aspects of painting without getting too far from him. Of course, we look at paintings of his and we think about the great murals, but we have very little in terms of smaller works, right? Smaller scale, complete, not huge architectures of figures, compositions. So we have the Tondodoni, we have works that were not really complete. But Tondodoni is an impressive work, very polished, of course. Where do we take painting from there? And I think that I was about to say, to develop that thought, saying that we can develop aspects of that in one direction or another, but without going too far. If we are to explore a painting, we can explore it. Now, when you start taking one aspect, what I would say too far, very far, you have, or the further you go in developing that aspect of the painting, the more you risk losing the integrity that you had. And I think with Michelangelo, you have, can you do better? Perhaps, as a painter, yes, perhaps, but you have a great achievement of integrity of the painting, and of the man, of course. When you can go to, say, someone as Andrea del Sarto, great integrity. You have developed aspects. Also, the medium is not the same. You could argue, but that allows him to do certain things that other painters might not have been able to do. But overall, the integrity is retained. In some cases, I would say that you have aspects of painting that are developed to the detriment of that integrity that was attained by these earlier Renaissance, early Baroque, Baroque painters. Titian, I think he retains great integrity, but I am not sure there is a price to be paid. If you want to develop something overboard, so to speak, well, you don't want to do it overboard, but if you stretch things, it could be that you're going overboard. You're losing what I call the integrity. So I think that composition in France does become very well exploited as a dimension of painting. So you have great compositions, successful, but to the detriment, in the works that I have in mind, to the detriment of an integrity that you find in earlier works. Why not carry certain aspects of painting in one direction very far? And one answer to that question, maybe the answer to that question, should be, I think, because then it is done to the detriment of all other aspects of painting, and so to the loss of that integrity that was attained. And what are we really speaking about in terms of integrity? This is related to the integrity of the human being. And so if you want to think about the discourse of the Renaissance, well, you know, the Renaissance man is the man who's considering all aspects of life within painting. And so you will find the illustrative aspect in Raffaello, of course, School of Athens, but it's integrated. So you can't really accuse him, and you don't yourself, of being an illustrative painter and you know, debased painter is what we find in later modernity. Of course not. But you have that aspect. So later you have some people referring to it as the historical aspect of painting. He would not have necessarily done that.
What do you mean the historical aspect of painting?
Historical painters, you know.
History painting just means scenes,
right,
that are either, you know, with figures. That's what it means. It means, you know, that it's not portraits, it's not still lives, it's not landscapes. It's history painting is
stories, telling stories.
Well, not even necessarily. I mean, because very often the story is just an excuse. But it's not. What's important about history painting is not particularly that it tells its story. It's a more complex painting that depends on construction, because it's not something you can just, you know, it's not an apple that you're painting. It involves painting figures. I mean, even if it's just Mary and Joseph and a baby, or, you know.
Yeah, okay, but it's a story, and I don't mean
it's a story, but that's not the fact that it's a story is not essential to it.
I didn't say it was.
But no. I mean, no. Well, anyway, not the way I.
Essential to the term, you mean? Not essential to the term.
I mean, as a category in painting, you see, you know, we can talk about what, you know, there's all sorts of paintings that would be included in history painting that, you know, it's what it is. It's paintings that aren't genre paintings, that aren't still lives or landscapes or portraits. And, you know,
give me an example that is not telling a story, or that is.
It might mean any painting tells a story in a sense. But the point, that's not the essence of it. You can genre painting, for instance.
Where do you
call so there's a bunch of people sitting in a bar room and drinking, and it's a story. You know.
And is that historical?
It's not. They even call it history painting. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yes.
Is that history painting? It could be, you know, it could like the Stations of the Cross. That you find them in every church, and these artists. I mean, it became, you know, an exercice de style, because, you know, they're okay. They're telling the story, but, you know, it's not that. I mean, they had to do so many of them. It's you know, you see a picture of some person, and it's got, you know, Deborah, or it's or Judith, or, you know, but it's the essential thing is not that it tells a story. That's not the essence of it.
I never said it was. I'm just referring to the term.
I'm just saying that it means paintings with, usually with, you know, with a figure or several figures that are largely invented by the painter, because they can't, you know, like the Surrender at Breda. Okay, that tells a story.
Yes.
But it's also a painting that Velázquez had to do in his studio.
Yes.
You know, that's what history painting is. It's paintings that the artist has to do in his studio, and they've got to recreate. They've got to create something.
Okay, but insofar as there are history paintings, they bespeak a story.
All
Otherwise,
right. Look, Marco. Look, do you understand what I'm trying to tell you?
yes, it is not the term does not bespeak the
The
essence of
fact
the
that it
painting.
tells a story from the point of view of the painter, from the
Yes,
point of view of
but that's
the job
obvious.
of painting.
It's obvious. It's not about the painting. Is ultimately not about the story.
I'm
Obviously.
not saying that the painting is ultimately not about the story. I
Hmm.
mean, that could be very important. They come in. The point is that it's not as the it's
Historical is not as
storytelling is not the essence of it. The essence of it, from the point of view of the painter as painter,
well,
has
that's
to do
clear.
with.
That's obvious. That's obvious. I was just saying, qualifying the term historical painter as being the painter, the painting that refers to a story that somehow represents a story. But of course,
Well, I wouldn't say that, but
I'm
okay,
just
I've made my
defining
point.
the word historical. What do you think historical means, or history? It means
I'm not.
story. That's
I'm
all.
saying a
I'm giving you a
history painting. I'm
yeah,
talking about the term history painting,
fine
and I'm
history
just.
painter. Well, history means story.
All right, Marco, this is utterly sterile. I'm
Anyway, it's
just trying to.
tautological. It's
All right,
tautological. It's
what?
tautological. It's tautological.
All right, I'm making a point which I think is important. That's all. I'm not, you don't have to
Yeah,
agree with
yes,
me.
but that's the size that, yeah, we can stick, let's stick to that. But of course, it's it's not ultimately about the story. It is the story itself is not of the essence, painting wise. It's not of the essence. What I was saying is that there is the illustrative aspect in Raffaello, but that is integrated in
All right.
other aspects of the painting. You maintain the integrity, and I think that in France, through the Roman school, or out of the Roman school, you have certain developments. With those developments, in the examples of paintings that I have in mind, that I have seen, you have what I see as a kind of degrading or decadence in favor of the development of aspects of painting, but that on the dark side, so to speak, you have a partial loss, if you like, not complete, but a loss of that integrity that I find in other painters. And I find certain other painters much more compelling with respect to what I consider to be the integrity. And this problem of integrity, I find testified to in a very incisive manner by those works that I was referring to from in what we call calligraphy. And that is something that is ill understood usually, and it was definitely ill understood by those Europeans who went to the East and saw that, oh, look at this, it's superficial, it's in that sense of Japanese prints, or there is something that is very attractive, something very modern in all of these things. And look at this, it's minimalist. And so if you go online today, you'll see minimalist art, and you will see the brushstroke of a circle.
Yeah, that's a discourse that's heaped on top of things that really happened. So, for instance, a painter like Van Gogh or Maurice Denis or some of these late 19th century guys who were very interested in Japanese woodcuts, for instance, they were not thinking, "Oh, wow, it's modern." They were looking at it in the optic of modernism in the early modernist sense that I'm talking about. And before I go on about that, about what they were seeing in Japanese prints, I want to say that the way I use the word, I've adopted this early modernist discourse about painting, which I've developed in a certain way as a result of the emergence of contemporary art. But when they talked about the illustrative aspect, they didn't mean telling stories. They ultimately meant they ultimately meant the expression of volume and space,
The
which
effect.
is not the effect. It's just it's an inevitability. You draw two lines. You draw some lines on a surface, and right away there starts being things that are near and things being far. And in the early modernist time, nobody had the idea of making just pure abstractions.
Of course.
So later on in second wave modernism and eventually third wave modernism, the illustrative aspect began to be understood as simply as the relief quality that a painting has by virtue of there being marks on the surface.
Yeah, well, that's what I call effect. But anyway, go ahead.
Well, I mean, if you use the word effect for that, then you can't use it for other words, for other things where you might want to use the word effect. For instance, you can have effects of light. You can have effects of.
But that's a more narrow sense. In this...
Well, but those are effects, or effects like effects of texture, or effects of transparency, or there's also.
These are all narrow, as I said, these are narrow senses of the term. What I'm telling you is,
okay, but effect.
I call that to be the dominion of.
Well, I mean, all right. If you want to use that word, go ahead and use it. I wouldn't use it because I think it confuses the issue. Right. This is an inevitable thing that happens as soon as you start putting marks on a surface. You start getting, it's just it happens inevitably. Certain things are nearer, certain things are farther, and you start having that. And call it an effect if you want to. And then there are the marks themselves, and they are the stuff on the surface, and that the early modernists called that the decorative aspect.
Yes, yes.
And the thing about the Roman school, and the idea, the understanding of the early modernists was that there's the decorative aspect of painting and there's the illustrative aspect of painting. And those two things have to be working together in a certain way that they called, this is their term, true painting.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, it's a technical language. That's right. And that is, I mean, there's other examples and there's other things, but that is what the Roman school, for the most part, maintained.
Yes. Well,
and that's what the French early modernists revived in France in the 19th century. I mean, by then Italy was washed up.
Right.
In
what I would say to that is that that what you have there, these two aspects of painting, are mirroring, or that distinction is mirroring poles that were set up at the very dawn of the modern world.
No.
You could say, well, you could say, you can find these. No, look, I'm not trying to, before you say no, consider this, understand what I mean by this. I don't mean that you cannot discern those aspects of painting in all painting. I mean that those aspects were alienated from each other at the very dawn of the modern world, if only in blueprint. But that the effect of that blueprint became widespread, and that it affected painting as well, inevitably. And so you have this split, as it were, of these two aspects or dimensions of painting. But the split occurs in the very blueprint of the modern world, and you will find it in all other fields of life.
If there's anything in what you're saying, what happens is it's not that there's a split; it's that there's
alienation from each other, if you like.
No,
there is no. The integrity is lost.
It's not. There's things. I mean, Strauss talks about this when he discusses Plato and so on. there's things that you can talk about that don't exist. For instance, the best example I can find has to do with color. Color has 4 attributes. And these 4 attributes, you can talk about them, you can think about them, but you can't separate them. So for instance, color has value, and it also has temperature, let's say. Talk about 2 aspects of color. But you can't just have temperature. That doesn't exist. Any color will have a certain value and a certain temperature, and the other 2 aspects of color as well. So there's things you can do in speech. It's like Plato constructing his Republic, Socrates constructing the Republic in speech. But it's not something that you could actually do because it's too crazy, because as Strauss points out, Socrates or Plato is abstracting from something. So for instance, in the case of the final city, of the virtuous city of the Republic, he's abstracting from the body. So women are soldiers, there's no families, and all this stuff. So in painting, in the early modernist understanding, you can't possibly separate the decorative aspect from the illustrative aspect. All you can do is, a painting is always stuff on the surface and always some kind of implication. And there were attempts in the 60s, for instance, people like Ad Reinhardt, who their ambition was to make something utterly flat, to completely eliminate any suggestion of space. And so that led to pop-op and these kooky experiments. So
how does this contradict what I just said?
It contradicts it because there's no split.
Come on, Paul. I was speaking about a formal distinction, a formal splitting.
But the formal distinction, so what happens?
And I was speaking about wait. I was speaking about the formal distinction as pointing to, or as suggesting, or as referring to somehow to a loss of integrity, so that these
all right, but
something was wrong there.
What I'm trying to get to something, and what I'm trying to get to is that the early modernists, because of what was occurring in painting, which wasn't a split, but it was this degradation of painting because of the ideological pressure it was under. And as a result, the painters, who weren't necessarily ideological at all, were doing painting that was more and more about, what they called illustrative. That doesn't mean that there's not a decorative aspect, but they weren't.
To be sure.
They weren't worried. They weren't concerned about that. So they were bringing back in this concern and this understanding about this inevitability,
yes,
this fundamental thing that's in the nature of painting itself. They were making it important again, so that when a painter like the painters who were interested in Japanese prints, they recognized the very interesting way that the Japanese artists were dealing with these aspects of painting in a powerful way, and then they fooled with it a little bit. The certain painters tried to see that if they could introduce some of those tactics, some of those Japanese tactics, into their work. I mean, it didn't amount to a hill of beans, but that did happen.
Yes, which is in line with what I was saying, namely that what was important about the at least not necessarily all of those prints, which were, we're talking about already the mechanical reproduction, so the early stages of the modern world in Japan in this case. So there was they were popularized and popular works that they may have been looking at very often. Yes, it had certain things that are, as you put it, interesting to them, and the effect of them was attractive to them, and they thought they could integrate them in their own works, and but that was not what the tradition was all about, and that wasn't certainly not very important, traditionally speaking, in the Far East. What I was referring to was of the essence, and it had you could say both theological and political repercussions and effects reverberated across their countries. But now that which I was referring to here, the problem of integrity of virtue, I think is a problem that is obscured, partially obscured, or progressively obscured, as with the unfolding of the modern world. And the Roman school, people from the Roman school, it seems to me, and even given what you have written about it, and what you few words that you have articulated here about it, testifies to a problem, that there has been a disjuncture. There's a sense in which that the harmony of the whole, the integrity, is under siege, and those who speak of these two elements as in need of being well integrated into painting are on the right track. I'm not saying they're not. You could speak about yin yang, as this, both have to be integrated with each other, and they're originally integrated. And those who seek to emphasize one aspect to do so, overboard, to the detriment of the other aspect, and end up with disjunctures and eventually monstrosities. And alienation from that integrity of origin. Now, what I referred to earlier was just tangentially, but was that in the works that I have seen, in particular those that you could say that stem from that Roman school, I see some very good things. In Poussin, for example, see great things. He has, but at the same time, I see that something has been lost as far as I'm concerned. Now,
I understand your point. Let
okay,
me address it. You're good. And I can, sort of agree with what you're saying, except that if a painter doesn't know how to paint, it doesn't matter how great his soul is. And so
it doesn't matter to whom.
It doesn't matter to anything, because the paintings are going to be no good, because you have.
This is a problem. Yeah, this is a problem.
You have to know your craft. I mean, Michelangelo, for God's sakes,
Yes, no, this is a Platonic problem, however, and the sophists begin with, and I will venture to say that they take that stance that, at least on the face of things, you are taking.
Oh, come on, Marco, come on.
No, well, no, understand me. Understand me. What comes first, the soul or the body?
It's not that. It's not that. It's not a question of what comes first. If one thing's not there, the other thing's not there. You can't learn to paint on the basis of being virtuous. Yeah,
You're misrepresenting what I'm saying. I think, unless you take what you're saying more seriously than what you seem to be doing. In other words, yes, platonically speaking, don't, you know, I'll give you this example, which is very pedestrian, but I would say, don't come to my school. Don't go to university if you're not planning on learning. But what I mean by this is that if you're not a good man, don't be a soldier. If you are not,
well, okay, but what are you going to do? People come along and they myself or other people or people that come to me to try to learn painting, they come along and all right, it's God who sees to the bottom of people's souls. And I in my own teaching, I emphasize that ultimately people can't learn to paint if they don't reorient themselves, and that the first aspect of that reorientation would be to get out of to get out of relativism, a relativistic way of looking. But if you go back to the 14th century, there were mediocre and bad painters. It's not.
Sure, I didn't say that. I never implied that being born in the 14th century were good.
Virtue. There are there's a way in which the body is the body, and the way in which the soul is the soul, and one can't exist without the other. But there it is. And painting is a craft. And
obviously,
of course, when people learn the craft and then abuse it, they're doing evil.
Yes, obviously.
But
yes.
that doesn't mean that that they haven't mastered the craft. And people who master a craft and then do evil with it, it's a particularly revolting spectacle. But
that doesn't. I don't want to say, it turns out it sounds too moralistic as far as I'm concerned. No, I mean,
how is saying that painting is a craft and there's things you have to learn that don't have anything to do except about learning them? How is that being moralistic?
No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about their emphasis on being good and evil. Especially if it becomes pedantic.
I mean, but there are things where you see the evil in them.
Yes, it's look. I mean, these are terms that I would approach with more care. It's easy to say evil, good.
How am I being careless in how I'm using these terms?
No, it's just that, they can cover up more than they declare, than they show. So it's easy to appeal to them.
I'm not covering anything up, Marco. If you can uncover something that I don't see, please do. But I'm not covering anything up.
Well, maybe unwittingly.
Unwittingly. I mean, God knows what I'm doing unwittingly. I mean, I could be destroying the world. It's unwitting because I certainly have no intention. I have no intention of doing anything bad. So it's certainly unwittingly. And I freely admit that I could be doing all sorts of things without understanding it. I don't think I'm being careless. If you want to show me how I'm being careless and using those terms, my point is that there's, again, I've said this to you a million times. We're on the cross of mortality. There's the ancient astrological symbol of the earth. It gets into Christianity within the incarnation. So that there's a way in which painting is a technical problem. There's a way in which, and then that a certain kind of mastery then it then becomes an arena.
Yeah, well, we've I think we're at a point that we have addressed that has come up in earlier discussions that we've televised in the past, namely that I have emphasized that the necessity of a prelude, as it were. You referred to it just now. I mean, you can't be you have to free yourself from the dogmas of our peculiar to our age in order to engage in any serious work as a painter. But maybe we place a different weight on that point. What does that entail, and what is that? How does that really translate
Except that
in our work?
Except that Marco, I'm fully involved with painting and also with teaching painting.
Well, that's all right. There's no except. Why do you say except?
Well, because you are free to have a more theoretical idea about it. I'm not.
I don't understand that proposition.
I mean, I've got to have results. So I experimented with a lot of things.
What do you mean? I've experimented too. So what are we talking about?
Well, all right.
You have to have results.
I mean,
what are we talking about? What are we talking?
I went through all kinds of ideas about the nature of painting.
Okay, but I. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. I've gone through a lot of things. Am I showing you my history?
All right, but I'm all right. Look, fine, whatever, Marco. I mean,
right.
You're you, and I don't know anything about it. I know that I have gone through it. I mean, what I'm hearing from you, yes, what you're saying now, strikes me as very beautiful, but too theoretical at this point to be practically useful. So in other words, I'm all for it. I think we want to. Our ideals are identical.
Okay.
But I don't see how, on the basis of how you're the intermediate steps, how do you get there? That's the thing. So we're in a crisis. We're not really. We're not two scholars sitting here discussing historical crap. We're standing on a flat plane of ashes that goes as far as we can see. Okay. And we're thinking, how can we rebuild the golden city that used to be where we are? I mean, that's how I look at it.
I don't think it will be rebuilt. Look,
well, build a new golden city, whatever it is, to do something in the midst of this completely ruinous situation.
This question is akin to the one that Strauss asks in the case of orthodoxy. Can you be an Orthodox today? Is well, or what are the options? For example, in the case of Judaism, right? What kind of Jew can you be? You can be a political Jew, an ideologue. He hardly succeeded in his youth. He was good at holding a pin, but not a rifle. Or you can become a cultural Jew, and so.
Are you talking about Strauss? Because I missed the beginning.
Leo Strauss. But that's completely inadequate because to say that that the Bible is a product of the Jewish mind is to miss the point entirely. Or you can be an Orthodox. Now the problem with the Orthodox, you see, this is where this segment of our conversation is pertinent. Now, the problem of going back to Orthodoxy is that a return to Orthodoxy would, as he puts it, would presuppose that everything that Spinoza said was wrong, that there was no basis for his questioning orthodoxy. That the golden age was in the past, and that we can recover the golden age, and that's that, without having to worry about Spinoza. And Strauss's point, in effect, is that the beans have been spilled. The vase was broken, and to have the golden age, you would need a context amenable to it, that is compatible with it. That context is not there. You could struggle.
Yeah.
You could struggle to recover the golden age within a new context. Now, in the past, this may have been possible without too much trouble. But in the modern context, which is a very special context, questions come up that one had no need to bother with in the past, in the pre-modern past.
Well, you know, Marco, we've been over this before.
Yeah.
And
you know, this is very weighty. It weighs a lot on, which doesn't mean you can't learn grammar and set things up again, and
it gets to the second cave business. But
yeah,
you know, but the thing is that my attitude is different. You know,
I think that to the extent that it's different, you underestimate certain problems.
Well, I mean, that may well be. That may well be. It's just that I don't see it that way, and I don't feel it that way. But all right, so what's the recipe for getting out of the second cave?
Recovering what is of the essence. Now, you've spoken of composition as you understand it, as you present it.
I don't think composition is the essence of art.
Well, you tell me what the essence is, because if it is,
well, I mean,
delegation,
to me, the essence of art is much closer to the kind of things that you're talking about.
Close.
But it's much closer. You know, to me, I would say that the essence of art is poetry, and by poetry, I would, you know, you use the word integrity and these other ways. There's different ways of describing these things, but it would be something along those lines. But in order to be a painter who is going to attempt that sort of thing, you know, you have to at least have some paint and something to paint on. No, it's and then you have to start understanding certain things, because we can see what's been going on for over a century. We can see what people have been doing.
Okay, I'll give you another example. Rembrandt. You know, he was very successful throughout many years, decades of his life, and
then he became Rembrandt, and they didn't want it anymore.
Yeah, what do you know? So what was his last?
And the poor fool had spent all his riches, and so he lived out his later years in semi-poverty. Well, what else is new?
So his last works,
and poor Cervantes never, you know, he never got anywhere, you know. So this is life. What do you want?
Well, the question is, if you look at certain, well, at his last works, especially ones that are seldom considered, even today.
Like what?
Well, say, for example, the Oath. Now, yes. Well, what would be more important to him in that painting? Why would he have gone that way? But in general, the works, but even other painters, even Titian has works that become somewhat more, I guess today we would call stylized. But so that suggests that some of these painters have catered to certain expectations, and they're no longer doing that. They do not feel compelled to focus on aspects of painting that are not, for them, as important and as essential as others, and their work becomes more uncompromising, I would say. So that suggests that painting is not about what makes it popular. There's something more to it, and in some cases you have painters who are dedicating themselves entirely to that without distractions.
You're certainly not arguing against anything I've said here, right?
No, it was not my intention to do so.
Well, because I don't know, I don't understand what you're addressing.
Oh, that, well, the question is, see, what we could call the crisis, the collapse of civilization, invites us
the disappearance of art.
Well, of everything.
Right, we're talking about painting here.
Of people, yeah, okay, well, yeah, but the whole, but again, for me, painting is integral to the constitution of human life.
Okay, but we're talking about painting. We're talking about the disappearance of painting.
It's one of the fundamental poles of human life, and that was thrown out of schools. So probably maybe the first thing that was thrown out of modern schools. They retain music more than painting, and I think that was important. There's a reason why they had to do that.
Well, painting was the first thing destroyed for the simple reason that it's the thing that's the most prestigious.
No, I don't think that is of the essence. That's why it was really destroyed. It had to be destroyed because painting is, in the classical sense, is the disclosure of the world, and it invites reflection and thought and something that is immutable, whereas it had to be replaced by the objects of the market and of the evolutionary world that was in the making.
I think that happened, but I don't think at all that that's why it happened. That is what happened, but it's not why it happened.
I don't think it's because of the prestige, and the prestige is secondary.
I think the reason.
Why was it prestigious? Why was it prestigious? That's the issue.
Well, okay, but the idea was not to destroy the thing. What happened was with the whole, the equality democracy business, everybody had to be able to get a piece of this prestigious thing, and that resulted in the destruction of it. It wasn't
okay, but you're taking the authoritative dimension of painting, destroying it, and prestige. It is the proper function, the authority of painting that is being destroyed. Painting is no longer a guide to human life. It's not a fundamental pole of human life in the constitution of a polity. it becomes a plaything of the polity, of the new polity.
No, I mean, we're not having a fundamental disagreement.
No, yeah, right. So, okay, so it's, I mean, prestige.
I'm not,
it was completely displaced, and it had to be out of the window in schools because it can no longer guide us to reflection, because we're no longer reflecting, because now we have to move on, abandon reflection, the reflection that painting discloses, and move in the question of the eternal that it opens up.
Yeah, well, I would say that, but by the time it had been pushed out of the schools,
it's already,
it had long lost that function.
Yeah, okay. But it was that becomes just the manifestation of something that had occurred. But what I'm suggesting is that it's more fundamental than music itself, which is retained by schools. Much.
Well, again, I think there's a more mundane reason.
Now, yeah, well, no, yeah, but for me, it goes back to something more fundamental, which has with the relation between painting and music.
Yeah, except that there's a dynamic. It's things that don't always happen for these ultimate reasons. I mean, those ultimate reasons are there, but there's also these contingent things that are going on, and these practical.
I see. Yes, for me, the contingent it doesn't exist on its own, and it's not its own ground. No,
Marco. It's
look at you have the economy.
It's your attitude is very noble and respectable, but I think it becomes problematic because it doesn't it abstracts from certain,
I don't abstract.
I think
you're abstracting. I think that you're abstracting from the noble, from the whole. And what I am simply saying is that there's no I'm very radical about this. I make no.
I realize that.
I make no concessions to modernity.
Well, right,
zero. I'm coming up with.
To me, it's not a question of concessions. To me, it's a question of exactly as you say, of grasping the whole, and the whole has these other aspects to it that are part of what's beautiful about things.
Yeah, but
it's like the body. The body. I mean, if you start talking about the body in those kinds of ultimate terms, it's not even there because it's the soul.
No.
The body is all about the soul, and then ultimately, you would never get a Michelangelo.
You miss completely what I said. You miss completely the whole everything that I've been talking about. The role of mediation. Wasn't in a recent article of mine up there on Vogel and View. That where I integrate a discussion on the body. I think so. Is it already out? The one on the sensual, the poetic, and the sensual life. So the poetic essence of the sensual life, something to that effect. The title, and there I also refer to the sensual relation between man and woman. Now, what you just said is, as far as it goes, is a reflection of a stereotype. You think about these people who talk about platonic love, right? Which is a modern invention. You go from the carnal, le charnel, to the spiritual. This is not at all what I'm talking about. What I am talking about is the mediation between the two. And so what I am saying is that the human body, if you look at the article, for example, I articulate this at some length. So the human body is distinguished from the beast's body in that it is an essentially moral, poetic entity. It is a moral, poetic body, which is to say that by nature, in other words, we're born that way, oriented to not just to do things, but to do things oriented towards the good. Whereas the donkey doesn't have to be worried about these things. He just does things. And unwittingly, he may serve the good, but simply unwittingly. Whereas we are born to be consciously oriented, and our body is therefore not to be understood in terms of mere flesh or as a machine. Not at all. I mean, not even the donkey's body, by extension, is to be understood as a machine, given the broader moral context in which he or it is born and exists in. But our body is to be understood in a poetic.
Okay, but it's not. But what I'm saying doesn't imply looking at the body as a machine.
No, yeah. Okay. What did you say? What did you say?
No, don't catch me up in language
No,
stuff.
no. I'm just trying to understand what you said does not imply that the body is a machine. You said I can't understand you.
Yeah, what I said doesn't imply looking at the body as a machine.
Implied.
Okay. And when you talk about mediation, okay, but mediation means something between two things.
Yes.
One of those things would be the body.
Yeah.
In other words, the body in this mediation.
Yes.
There's
not
back
our body.
And forth.
Not our body. Not our body. The animal body, let us say. But what I'm saying is that our body is a poetic.
I hear what you're saying.
Not only that, but I would also say that the poetic is key to the proper understanding of the other two poles, in the respect that our body is the true body.
No, well, okay, but I mean, we're talking about mediation. We're talking about mediation between the soul and the body.
Not our body. Not our body.
You're expressing what that mediation should produce. You're expressing what it implies.
No. Yes, but what am I saying about it? I am saying that the human being is that mediation, and that the human body is a moral entity that is the mediator between the beastly and the divine. And the divine is none other than you could say, nous. It is mind, properly understood. So if you say, mind and body, if you look at the ancients, I mean, this abstraction of the mind out of the body, it is a relatively recent phenomenon that you don't have among the ancients. And you have glimmers of it in Christianity at some point. And of course, they raise the mind outside of any bodies, and to say,
if you're getting rid of the mediation by calling the body the mediation. It's as if I mean, okay, we have this moral conscience, but we do also have bodies. And yes, I
don't think it's I think that's an abstraction. Moral conscience, the notion of conscience already.
Well, all right, but the body is not an abstraction, and theoretically, at least,
poetry is not either. The poetic, as I have been addressing the problem, is not an abstraction. The body is an abstraction.
Well, I don't know that.
The body, as you understand it, is an abstraction. The physical, as such, is an the donkey.
Yeah, I've heard you say this, Marco, and that's where we part ways. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, but I come back.
I don't know if you appreciate the significance.
How are you gonna? How you? Well, I won't ask the question. I'm just going to tell you on that basis. On that basis, painting is not going to get a new start. I don't think. I mean, I'd like to, do it, get it going. Show me, and I think you go a long. I mean, it's a very bold move. It's incredibly radical, and I appreciate that. But I can't follow you that far.
Okay.
I mean, I appreciate it, but I just
Okay, we'll work
Obviously,
on.
we're different from animals, but like animals, we have a body. We have something that animals don't have.
Yes, but
But
this is
that is not a radical transformation of our bodies. I mean, obviously, our bodies are inhabited by what we are, the qualities of soul, or whatever you want to call it, that we have, and that obviously changes the situation. But still it's a dynamic. It's this, it's a dynamic between these things that really aren't there. And just okay, you call it an abstraction, and you argue that it's an abstraction
yes, the
that
body's an
comes
abstract.
out of that comes out of this modern instrumentalized way of thinking about things. And I can follow the argument, but I just
Well, consider ancient languages for even tribal people. You get a glimpse of course, it is a very rough sketch of this, but we get it in tribal language, and the moderns have, in order to account for that language, modern scholars have invented the term animism. And for the ancients, according to them, all bodies are filled with spirits or gods. We usually call spirits those gods who are within the body, and mind and gods those that are outside of the body. But nevertheless, you get the sense. And so that tribal people will look at a river and they will look at a spiritual entity, not a body, or the horse. And of course, we have these images of, I'm just referring to the most obvious things, of the Egyptians who look at a cat and say, here's a god, without distinguishing really. There's a kind of, we would call it a confusion between what is above us and what is below us. What is above us, of course, being a super spiritual, body-free mind, and what is below us, it would be an inferior, irrational, less rational animal form of life with respect to us. So
but don't speak for me, because I
okay,
don't have that attitude. I mean, to
Hmm.
me, the cosmos is permeated with consciousness and personhood. That's just
Okay.
that's how I experience life. And for that reason, I'm outraged when I see all these different manifestations of treating the world in this instrumentalized way. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean, in the words of Shakespeare, that when you cut me, do I not bleed? I mean, it's just there are these bedrock things. It doesn't mean that because in one sense the body is just a body. That doesn't mean that one has this modernist thing. It doesn't mean that you don't see the body as something sacred. It's like the body of Jesus. They crucified it and laughed at him. And
Well, yes, but this is all superficial. What I am or in the classical sense of vulgar, that is to say, plebeian as a way of speaking, or provisional. If we're speaking about the nature of reality, what is really real, then we can question the fact that um, you know um, early question our way of speaking as being really based on abstractions. The earliest people do not abstract mind from body. I don't mean that we shouldn't, but that they experience, well, things, the contents of the world, yeah, without bothering with that distinction. And I'm not saying we shouldn't bother, between mind and body. I think that distinction is essential to our education and to our understanding of things. But
But it's part of our experience. There's mental anguish and there's physical pain. I mean, these are things. This is part of
your
experience.
experience as
No, there you go. No, it's not modern consciousness. It's a, you know.
I didn't say it's modern. You have the
Anybody who receives a wound feels pain. And
this is not the point. Well, yes and no. Um,
look, getting over pain. I know a lot about that, and you can do incredible things to get over pain. But still, there's always some way that the physical can surprise us.
yes,
And
clearly.
we're subject to this thing in the same way that the
Well,
spiritual can surprise us. It's just there it is.
yeah. Well,
It's
as I said, I would not get rid of that distinction. I think that we live and we have our sense of self in the in the context of that distinction. In fact, we are somehow we emerge between these two poles. But then we attribute those two poles sometimes to ourselves, just as we attribute the mind. We say we have a mind, and we say that we have a body, and this we is somewhat in the middle. Now, what I am suggesting is not a coinage of mine. It is something that is, I think, was taught for a long time by various people, but that this we is a poetic middle between these two poles, and these two poles are not really predicates of this we, but that this we emerges out of this distinction, or it is the mask, if you like, also of that separation. But if you look at the nature of reality itself, then you can ask, what is fundamentally the case? Is reality fundamentally mind, or is it body, or how do the two integrate? And I would say that given the language and you could also say the mode of life, the language of early people. I don't mean Cicero. Obviously, with Cicero, you have a distinction, between mind and body. But I'm talking about for example, the oldest traces of Latin, ancient Chinese, the oldest works that we have and again, these are the oldest, I say, because then there's a whole oral tradition and whatever we don't have much of a trace of. We see that there is hardly any distinction between the two poles, mind and body. The terms themselves can refer to one pole or the other, suggesting that there's no real difference between the two. And that presents a problem for us because when you do not draw that distinction, then the role of the human being, the proper telos of the human being, is not brought to the fore. So, okay, I said that the body is an abstraction, but I also say the mind is an abstraction.
So then the human being is a mediation between two abstractions.
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
Well, I mean, you can look at things that way, but
which abstraction? Look at. I will refer to this. Okay, Cicero. Okay, Cicero had these debates with. Well, he's a mediator. He's the mediator between two poles. Okay, the Stoics and the Epicureans. The Epicureans, I'm simplifying for the sake of, clarifying issues. The Epicureans say that everything boils down to the body. The Stoics say that everything boils down to the mind. And he says, well, I mean, there's other ways of putting it, but it boils down to this.
Yeah, you could even put it the other way around in a certain, from a certain perspective.
The consequences of that proposition, those propositions, are not necessarily, they could be hidden. The consequence, what happens then? But face value, that's what they're saying. Of course, the gods. In plain theological discourse, are there gods or not? So is the nature of reality ultimately that of the gods? And one says, no, there are no gods. The other one says, so that's the Epicurean. The other one says, yes, the gods are the ultimate nature of reality. And so Cicero's mediative answer is nothing exceptional, nothing that is very impressive. He would say, look, I say that the Stoics are more right than the Epicureans. I'll leave it at that. It is more true to say that there are gods than to say that there are no gods. This is his academic skepticism, as Strauss called it. But I mean, that may not be very enlightening as a term. This is his Socratic stance, which it is not superficial. It's simply a matter of saying, okay, how should we say things? How should we speak? This is the way I think is fair to speak. It is more true to say that there are gods than to say that there are no gods. Does that mean that he's in our modern terms that he is an agnostic, that he says, I don't know? No. It means that there's another conversation to be carried on that problem that takes us somewhere else, and he's not going there. And that this is related to the problem of the mind and body as being both abstractions. This opens up a horizon of possibilities for painting itself. I mean, the painter. What do I take my bearings from? Must I take my bearings from body? Yes, as a child I do. But there comes a point where, you take Boucher, for example, yeah, you referred to him as he didn't need any models at the end. Well, he's working from memory, we say, in a plebeian, vulgar sense. Michelangelo. There's the cliche, Michelangelo, somewhat. Michelangelo says, I am not sculpting anything. I'm paraphrasing. I'm just bringing the sculpture out of the marble, right? The form. The form is within, is hidden, and I'm bringing it out. So I'm taking off the part that is added, and I'm bringing out what is already in there. It's already there. I'm not realizing anything new. I'm bringing it out. He was a radical Platonist. Why was he painting? From the clues that we have, he gave up painting because it was too painful for him. Physiologically, you could say, physiologically, it was okay. But there were. He focused on writing. It was. Oh well, you see, we have a body. We're tied. Well, the body is ours, and the mind is ours, and we're tied to the body, and it's a habit of ours. We live that way. It's our habit. What would the alternative be? I've been raising this question in articles and trying to open up the question. What would is there an alternative to this? mind and body is our predicates. We're so used to that. It is my body, it is my mind. And can there be a body without a mind? Can there be a mind without a body? God, and then matter, res extensa. I'm just opening up a few provisional questions because it is a big problem. It's complicated. You bring in this ego, the modern self. The modern self is supposed to kind of replace the mind of God into this new world. It gets very sticky, and there's a lot of strings attached.
It doesn't exactly replace, well,
Somewhat in the modern world, because
yeah, right, but it's not.
It's going somewhere else.
It replaces it because it fills a vacuum. It doesn't become anything that it wasn't before.
What replaces God in the modern world is ultimately the superego, which is the universal regime of the Leviathan. That's the full replacement. But he's a provisional. It's sort of a, what do you call it? A signpost for something that is to come. He's this new individual. But individual.
The mind of the philosopher of the future, who now turns out to be everybody and anybody.
But the very fact that he is the individual, this modern self, suggests that he has, or he is, in the abstract or symbolically, replaced or dethroned God, who was the individual in the Middle Ages. The individuum, he cannot be divided by definition. So he is symbolically replacing them. Of course, that's not enough because he's going to have to serve the coming of the new super ego, the super individual of the state. Okay, so it's just that we have these, a crisis. We have collapse of civilization, of language, and all of this has exposed the roots of civilization. And okay, in philosophical discourse, we see, for example, Klein saying, he took courses with Heidegger, and he saw that Heidegger had exposed Aristotle in a way that hadn't been done by any other people, other scholars, but he had done so. Heidegger had done so for the purpose of destroying Aristotle, and Klein responded that the Aristotle that Heidegger had exposed anew made more sense than Heidegger. So that suggests that unwittingly Heidegger had raised questions, had exposed answers, even, or questions that were beyond his expectations and beyond, and that transcended his project. And so, in the light of which his project fell apart. Okay, so a lot has happened. We're faced with a collapse of everything, and this opens up questions or exposes that the tradition to reflection, to aspects of the tradition, and then we can we are obviously there to respond to it. What do we do to respond to it? We could try to imitate that tradition, or try to do the same thing those folks were doing. That for a long time, people used to say that, a long time ago, that the ancients are unreachable, right? And then perhaps we could try to be as good as the ancients, be in their league. Of course, the moderns would assume that we can go way beyond them, but I think that the wisest thing would be to say, okay, we can be as good as the ancients, but it also makes sense to say that we'll never reach the ancients. That would suggest that we shouldn't even try. That somehow it is not about reaching the level of the ancients as about seeing what was at the essence in the ancients.
Well, you know
yeah, well, you may agree with that. You may agree with that.
That's you know, to me, painting has a nature, the essence of it. It has an essential. There's an essence, and that's what interests me. I mean, you know.
Okay.
I'm not worried about imitating the ancients or doing better or as well or, you know, like whatever. I'm worried about. I mean, I love the ancients. There's painters that I've tried to emulate or think about all the time, or that
yes.
I feel filled by. But that doesn't trouble me at all. I mean, all I can do is what I can do, and the basis of anything that I can do is because I understand what the thing is, and understanding what the thing is means understanding what it is, what its essence is, what its nature is.
Okay.
So my problem is understanding the nature of painting and doing my best with that.
Yes, fair enough. I think my primary concern over the years has been to treat the problem of the essence of painting in direct relation to the problem of the essence of the human or of the whole.
Well, you know,
that's various facets of life.
But in a certain way, Marco, that goes without saying. I mean, for me, it goes without saying. The painting is obviously it's a language, it's a means. So in other words, ultimately, it's there to just say, do something beautiful, just to put it that way. So it's not learning about the essence of the thing is not doing beauty. Learning about the essence is learning the language, which then one can try to use towards a poetic end.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
So that's our being human, you know, and you know it's related to painting, but there's a fundamental problem, which is understanding the essence and grasping the essence of the thing, and that means getting one's hands dirty. It means looking at. It means, for instance, you know, one thing I teach my students. You know, a lot of these students they want to draw things, and so they think the figure. But I happen to know. I mean, you could contradict me. You could have another idea about it, but I think that you must start with the idea that you're doing something with a page, with a canvas. That's more fundamental than anything. And that's very hard to get students oriented that way. And it seems very bizarre to them. And I was brought to that myself by a whole series of stages, including things I learned from my teacher. So, you know, that's sort of a problem, a learning problem that doesn't have anything. I mean, ultimately, it's going to open up to the possibility of poetry and so on. But from a certain point of view, it's just about looking there, and so it's just a simple old problem.
For me, I mean, I confront the same problem of the page, and it's not. I wouldn't call it an altogether simple problem, maybe.
But no. I mean, simple in the sense that it's not in it as such at the beginning.
Yeah, but what is the page? For me, the page has a balance, a significance. There is I mean,
Okay, but I mean, I'm talking about just getting the student or
yes,
myself, when it was the case of myself,
yes,
to simply say, all right, this is the first thing, a primary in the sense of
no,
order.
that's
This
absolutely
is the
fine.
first thing. And then you go from there and you add these other things in. And
Yes,
ultimately, it's going to be about poetry
yeah,
for
it's fine.
for
There's
the
nothing,
people,
of course, the
for the
whole of the
people
page is important.
for the people for whom it can be about poetry, because other people, they'll learn these things and either they won't do anything with it, or they might use it to evil ends because their souls are, are
Yeah,
oriented in that way.
yeah,
So
look,
but
yeah.
again, it's like the body. I mean, you can use the body for evil ends. It's
Well, I've been look. I've usually taught children. If taught, I mean, I've taught, guided, children in when it comes to drawing, but um, yeah, I mean, there is, Rome is burning, and then the
burning. It's burnt down,
yeah,
ashes.
well,
When it comes to painting, ashes.
yeah, no, Romans as a whole. Um, so yes, so it's you know tomorrow or today or at the end of the day we're all dead. Um, so okay, I don't have. I mean, I'm open to certain prospects, academic, in painting. In other words, developing certain things, and you could have a school, but
Well, some schools are good and some aren't.
I don't know any that are good today.
Today, forget it. There's no good
Well,
schools.
that's what I mean.
But I mean, in the 19th century, for instance, there were better schools. I mean, it was better. It was
Oh yeah,
better
they
to
were
be
better and worse. Yes,
yeah.
sure, sure,
And the same
absolutely.
was true in the 17th century and the 16th century.
Yeah, but uh, yes. I mean, my
There
own
was not.
model.
There was nothing as corrupt as Bouguereau in the 16th century. But you know,
You have reached. You have had garbage all over the place, but I think you have reached. We have reached certain peaks.
oh yeah, I mean,
Uh,
garbage isn't necessarily the word. You had things that were weaker.
well, I would say
Now
garbage.
you have evil stalking across the land in 7 league boots.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the face of it, look, I mean, I respect your attempt to your work to that goes in the direction as a response to that to the garbage, to the wave of garbage. What can I say? Uh, I am perhaps uh, aspiring to a more audacious uh, you horizon and ends, um, and I'm more radical
Yeah, yeah,
in various, you know.
and all I'm saying is, one has to walk before you can run, and in
No,
order
yeah,
to,
obviously, I'm not in that sense radical. I mean, okay, in my response to the tradition, as well as, of course, to radical in responding to um, well, to the acquis, to the notions that we have acquired, and to the what I call concessions to modernity. Things that seem to be obvious to just about everyone, and and in that context, I have been. I mean, in writing, I have been. Um, I think that the recovery has to come through logos, the recovery of painting. That painting uh, is going to be in its constitution. It's going to be um, mediated by a logos. If that logos is good, to the extent that it's good, you will be able to
What
develop
do you mean a dialectic? Do you mean
a
people
good
talking
language,
within group?
good speech, way of speaking to, or to explain your life, your experience of life, your ordinary experience of life, even outside of painting. Um, uh, you know, this articulation, the speech. We are of course raised as children speaking in a certain way, and that speech is modern, and it brings in, flushes in. It's a tsunami. It goes on and on every day of micro particles of modern ideology, and it pervades all of our experience. To the extent to which it does is can hardly be underestimated. Overestimated. I mean, so that's why I've focused and have concentrated, dedicated a lot of energy of my life to exposing these facets of speech that are essentially modern. In recent, and I've focused in recent writings on I think the incarnation of these aspects of modernity, which is the doctrine of evolutionism. And so I have this article. I have the bulk of it is in a recording here, but it's hard to follow. It's in the recording. You have to read it. I have this article, somewhat lengthy, on. I think the title is "The Bankruptcy of Evolutionism," and I have discussions on time, trying to get back to the horizon of poetry as independent of external forces. So it's the fundamental mediator, autonomous, if you like, of autonomous in not in the modern sense, but in the sense that it's not compelled. It's not subject to compulsions, as a mediator between the two poles. So the animal, if you like, or in the divine. But these are terms that.
But what do you want people to do with that, Marco? I mean,
I realize the importance.
What step
Yes.
do you want people to take?
As you're working as a painter, as a drawer, realize the extent to which you are your work is is under the effect of obstacles, avoidable. That it is.
But if somebody is just at the beginning and they don't know what they're doing and they can't do anything, I mean, then that sort of realization is not getting them anywhere.
No,
they can say, all right.
No, why do they? Why do they not? If they're at the point where they don't know what the hell they're doing, there's something natural to the human being about painting. Because you hear these parents who say,
"Well, okay, then you're saying it's just got to flow out." I mean, it's starting to sound like surrealism.
No, I'm not saying it's flowing out like piss. I'm saying that there is something natural. It is a natural path for the human being as such. It is not a compulsion to go there.
But there was always art education. You go back to Greece.
I'm not saying otherwise. I'm just saying that this inclination of man towards painting, of the human being towards painting, which needs guidance, is crippled by our language, by modern language.
Well, I agree completely.
Well, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done in curing our language and our modern prejudice.
And I've talked about this. I've talked about the problem with the word creativity, the problem with the word art, the problem with the word personality.
But these are just big terms. These are just big terms. These are just big terms. The nature of the human being, the anthropology.
Okay, but these
it's just
terms
a general education problem. What
But
about the notion, general education problem, the problem of, the notion of time that we have, of the orientation of things.
well, okay, but I don't think that's gonna help the painting student, the beginning painting student.
Are we
But
lost in history? Are we evolutionary
well, yeah,
entities?
well, yes, I mean, but Marco, these are things that I've addressed a lot very directly for painting students, trying to get them out of a historicist, progressive mentality, which I think hampers their capacity to learn because it locks them in exactly like you're talking about to these ideas of the personality and the originality and art as this open-ended thing and so on. So sure. I mean,
Okay,
one has.
we'll have to explore. We'll explore this. We'll explore this. I must run, but
All right.
yes. It, what is wrong is to be addressed, and the alternative is what we need to be exposed to, I think. Explore the alternative as we paint on the side, because painting needs the support of good writing, of good discourse. And the
Oh,
bad discourse,
absolutely.
we have to, get rid of the bad discourse and start cultivating the good discourse that will be able to support good painting. Without the good discourse, you cannot have good painting. You'll have just a sham imitation.
I've said this very thing.
And so
I've
they
said this
both
very thing.
go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
A man and a woman. Bye, Paul.
Bye.